Eliot Schain's poetry has appeared in Plowshares, the American Poetry Review, Santa Monica Review, and Miramar, among other journals. He's also been published in 4 anthologies, including America, We Call Your Name, Poems of Resistance and Resilience. Eliot's most recent collection, The Distant Sound, was published by 16 Rivers Press in 2020. He has served as program director for the Poetry Society of America. He's taught high school and now works as a psychotherapist in Berkeley. Please welcome Eliot Schain.
Thank you. And thanks to Rivertown Poets. Nice to see faces I don't know. And a special thank you to friends of mine that came tonight. I appreciate it. And I hope it's worth your while. I'm going to read from this book, The Distant Sound, which was published by 16 Rivers Press. By the way, Sandy, is the sound okay? Let me know if it's not. It's okay? All right. Yeah, this book was published by 16 Rivers Press a year ago, and of course, pandemic year, so it's kind of difficult getting the word out in person. But we did a few Zooms, and Patrick, who I'm reading with, was published at the same time. So we're kind of a pair here. So thanks, Patrick, also for being my partner in crime. I'm going to do something I don't usually do. I'm just going to read straight through from the beginning of the book for about the 15, 20 minutes and only take one poem out. Otherwise, read straight on through so you get a sense of how it progresses from the beginning. First poem is called The Old Shepherd. It's from a section that's called Friends. And there's a certain synesthesia that's going on here. You'll see. The Old Shepherd. When the sound took me out of the house and into the yard, it grew wings.
Hello.
Hello. When the sound took me out of the house and into the yard, it grew wings and encolored, like that lofty earth bird who will not flee us. So I stayed close to the sound. And the nerve within that was always trembling, trembled again, until I closed in on the ghosts and their kind voices and empty forms so close to mine, like those cracks in the universe leaking still more color, until I could not what we call see, but could feel and hear. So I followed the sound, as if drinking from the chalice again, and continued through the city with its warrens and cafes and old homes carved out of nothing, as is everything, and then moved on to the countryside, where lakes became eyes, dotting the earth's skin to lure me deeper into sound. Second poem is called Pilot. It's for my oldest, dearest friend, Green, who went on to be a pretty famous writer, internationally famous writer, actually. And so this is for him tonight. It's called Pilot. We followed that sudden friend to the strange house with the warm party. And you drank without eating, then began flying paper planes in the room while giggling, as if the idea of flight were what you might have to reckon with, alone and cockeyed for years. Eventually, I dragged you into the yard and soon the street, and finally the fields where I tried to feed you milkweed and small animals, but you kept gazing at the heavens and drinking as your body thinned So I lay next to you and began counting the stars. And that's when God whispered in my ear, "We are all aliens. And you were right to try flight as the only way to get in." Satori. I wandered up and down the hall looking for open rooms with open windows and pools to swim in and trails to follow and food to eat that would change me. And then came the rest of my life with its carports and electrical wires and dens for hunkering down in. Yet here I am again in that vernal hallway, looking for rooms and pools and trails, but mostly windows to lean from and smell the breeze that has been inside all along. God and Creek. When John was 8, and went to the creek shaded by cottonwoods in a distant city on the American plain, he was flooded by the miracle of going home. As the dappled light and the toads near the water and the depressions in the ground that welcomed his bare toes reminded his bones, though they would last a long, long time, that what would make him a man was in the sound that comes by night. Corners of the day when the claptrap and the frittering are left behind. He placed his palms to the surface of that drifting water, and its church came into him, as it would forever onward. For what is maturation but the swelling reverence for this home we were given by some odd divine who's us to be both urn and ashes? And so John accepted his town and pecked with the others at what we might become, but always remembered the water from which the toads and the cottonwoods and all our gods build their beautiful echoes with gates, so we can be both human and free. If you've never been in a Midwestern thunderstorm, then you might not fully get the import of this poem. But if you have, then put yourself back there. Intense Midwestern thunderstorm. This is called Spark. When the lightning came through the socket in the house, he went out onto the great American plain to confront his maker. And in the thick night air, with only smatterings of rain, but the deep thunder that tickles bone, he thought of the visions that have changed the world, the brave, if slightly stupid ones in the lightning storm, with hands splayed against the sky and the human voice daring to find an equivalent sound. And then he thought of the love available to all of us, like electricity in the wall of a house that sometimes comes unbidden. The man who lived next door. The man who lived next door was a mystery. When I was young, we called him retarded, the adjective we used for everything we couldn't explain. That's retarded. She's retarded. He would wear galoshes when it rained, but the few times he spoke about the damaged fence or the duck who plagued the block one fall, he did not reveal an accent. My mother thought he'd been in the war. My father defended his right to privacy, as if the man were a secret part of him. My friends and I would steal in through the gate to peek eagerly into the window, but there was rarely much to see. A cereal box left on the table, a TV with snow, the flannel shirt hung over a chair as if mending itself. The one time we did catch him, he was standing in the middle of the kitchen, touching his throat. He looked panic-stricken. Years later, on a trip home, my father told me casually that our neighbor had died. His maid had found him. Cried as if he'd been a lover. The lover. That was my addition. I had learned a few things in the world and had begun to dream of him. He filled the recesses of my brain the way water creeps in, or the way clouds obstruct the sun, and there is no quick or easy way to be bright. Strap. When Tom was 10 and first moved to the South, there were many thrilling new experiences, like grits and ringworm and forests in the city. But most memorable was that black strap hanging from the barber's chair he was put in shortly after arriving. Tom had yet to realize is a recome, since the distinction between desire and the brain is like the gulf between the old and young. Now, with less hair and more sin, Tom has come to fear those men of the South, lingering like sloths put on earth to remind us this life we've come to love could end in the nick of time. Amos. When I heard the story of the snake handling pastor who'd gotten bitten and died because he demanded to go home where God was more likely to find him than in some hospital room, I thought of you exploring the universe prior to the seminary and the faith you pressed into me as if I were a nurse receiving tools or some body part mysteriously severed away. The Lord does work mysteriously. And thus, many years later, I find the YouTube video of you exhorting potential followers to surrender to your faith and greet strange circumstance like the pretty women at a hoedown, which is why I always consorted with the devil whenever I saw the tears in your eyes. Those revisions you were given as a substitute for lonely. And lonely is what I smell now, in the voice coming from the screen, so chipper and convincing, most of all yourself, that the answers you were seeking have come like Adam to tame the snake. And I'm going to finish with a poem called Plate. which unfortunately remains as relevant as ever. I don't know how much you know about John Brown, but of course it would be helpful if you know that he was a hero of the abolitionists, that he tried to incite a slave uprising by invading an armory in what was then Virginia, now West Virginia. Before that, he had been involved in burning some of the homes of the pro-slavery people in Kansas during the episode known as Bleeding Kansas. And he hid out in a cave in southern Nebraska when he was doing that. Plate. We visited John Brown's cave in the mid-60s in southern Nebraska, where the land still reeked of our pioneer efforts to get to the other side. And the cave was sufficiently gloomy, for there were still those race wars raging far away in Kansas and LA and Newark and Birmingham, triggered by yet another twist on the dark. And after we had toured it, we came out into the blinding light of another Great Plains day with its outdoor gift shop, where kind women were selling Kennedy memorabilia faster than anything about that grim-visaged puritanical man who gave his life up for a violence warped by the noble cause. And so, being of an impressionable age, plus always on the lookout for new heroes, I used my allowance to buy a plate with the bright face of our recently murdered president. For I knew little about this country erupting like the boils on Brown's face. And naturally, during the long drive home across the empty plain, I grew more enamored with my new hero as I traced the raw ceramic edges and let a chewed thumbnail touch down on the strong brow and cheekbones as if they might nourish me into the future. But when we finally arrived at the long white ranch house in a suburban part of Nebraska's only real city, where there were no black faces, save the friendly domestics bussed over to us, I stepped from the back seat of our brand new Chevrolet, and the plate slipped from my hands and broke into pieces against the hard macadam that drapes the earth with more sin given to turn us into grim gophers popping up for light after the rain, or crusty lizards under the rocks amid some weird inward kind of storm. I write this having been a lizard all my life. But when I hear about the men of Kansas and LA and Ferguson again, I taste the yoke of the hidebound strap that steers our dark and nervous sons. Thank you.